discussion on security. Securing your FileMaker solutions, and kind of a brief discussion on some of the other aspects of security. So there are cases, of course, where maybe it's an intranet solution. You want to provide everybody who needs access to the FileMaker database access without logging in for whatever reasons. I mean, there are some scenarios where that makes sense. Just have only the guest account active and don't give it a password. But I like the idea of identifying who somebody is. I also like the idea as a developer of identifying what machine they're on. Inside of your list of accounts, you can have a mix of accounts that are authenticated by FileMaker versus accounts that are externally authenticated. You set up a group name that says who's assigned to a group and what kind of privileges they have. And on the FileMaker side, you can take that group name and assign it to a privilege set that you're creating. So therefore saying that the people who belong to that group on the authentication server now have this level of privileges inside FileMaker.
IT also loves this because they can go and they can move people from group to group and change the privilege, essentially in one swoop, change the privileges of a whole group of people in a few keystrokes.
On their end.
On their end, and it has nothing to do with you. You give them the group, or either you give them the group names or they give you the group names. But once you do that, and you assign privilege sets to them, they can control who does what.
Yeah.
They don't even need you to do anything.
No, they can take people out of that group.
And they love that.
What's not to love? When a member of a group tries to open a FileMaker database, his or her account and password are passed to the external authentication server, because really that's who's handling the access here. And once that server determines that the proper credentials have been provided, it returns to FileMaker's server a list of groups to which that user belongs. This list is then compared to the group names that you set up in your FileMaker Pro database file, and the first valid match in your list is the one that is going to be used to authenticate that account. There's a lot of language that you're going to need to be able to speak intelligently on that has nothing to do with FileMaker, just all the AD stuff. So, and then also let your IT person see the FileMaker thing so they can understand what's going on your end.
Why would you have a user that's in two different groups where you'd have to worry about what order their privilege set is?
For example, this thing I was working on for a client earlier this week, they have some people that might work in the shipping department and some people that might work in QA. Mm-hmm. And depending on what day it is, they may have different access rights to it. And it's really not the person, it's so much what their role is going to be for that day. I do security last. And I mean last meaning last, but still before I deploy the solution. Well, we also have the advantage of having all the testing servers on our end before they go to a testing server on the client end. So before anything goes into the client's network environment, we make sure that security is built. One of the most important things to do is determine who your user groups are going to be and how they are different from other groups and what the roles are that are defined within those. So I like to go through an exercise at the end of the project. I know it's crazy. I try to find as much information as I can early on, but I make sure to revisit this exercise right at the end before deployment. And the reason for that is because in many cases, these user groups change, or the roles change, or the people who are exposed to the system change. I think none of us are strangers to starting off building something for finance, and then all of a sudden you find out there's a whole sales group component to it, or something like that, right? And what I like to do in there is I like to go inside privilege sets, and I like to determine what types of things can I control. And you see within a privilege set, I can control things on a record level, layout level, I can control value lists, and also scripts. So I like to go in outside of FileMaker and say, okay, well, in this group, can these people create records? If so, can they delete them? Can they edit them? And so on and so on. And write all this stuff down on paper, just like any other kind of requirement exercise you're doing. That's where these custom privileges come into play. Because someone might say, well, I've got this one group, and yeah, you say to them, can they delete records? And most of the time people just say emphatically yes or no. And that's how you can help define the group. But sometimes they might say, well, sometimes. They can delete records that are contact records, but they can't delete notes. Or they can delete notes, but they can't delete the actual contact. So that's why you go into this type of screen and you say, yes, they can delete notes, but in the contacts they cannot. But then if it even gets more finite, you'll notice in each one of these dialogues, there's this limited. And it pops up our friend, the specified calculation dialog, where I can go in and say, you can only delete a record if the account name of the creator matches the person who's logged into the system, which is a great one, meaning you can just delete anything you've created. But then if it even gets more finite, you'll notice in each one of these dialogues, there's this limited, and it pops up our friendly specified calculation dialog, where I can go in and say, you can only delete a record if the account name of the creator matches the person who's logged into the system, which is a great one, meaning you can just delete anything you've created. Or you can only delete an invoice that hasn't already been paid. You know, those kind of things. And in this case, this is one of those dialogues that needs to be Boolean. So, you know, before you get too fancy with your calculation, you want to say, there's either a yes or no answer to this question. This is another reason I like to do this at the end, by the way, because all too often within development, you go and you set all this stuff up, and then someone says, oh, I want, you know what, I want to add this functionality where we do blah, 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 and then you test it when you're not logged in as your admin, and it doesn't seem to work as well as it does when you're logged in as admin, and that's because you've already said they can't access a table, or a new table you've created carries with it, you know, pessimistic privileges. Why would value lists have its own category? What's the danger of letting somebody see a value list? How about if a value list is based on the index of a field? Like, I've created a value list of everybody who makes over $100,000 at our company. If you want to use the save, send as PDF or save or send as Excel features, you must make sure that in the case of PDF that you've allowed printing for that user. But what the majority of the world uses extended privileges are simply on and off switches for the different technologies that can access your database. If get privilege set name equals CA, which is what I named it, then perform a certain find. In this case, I just said find everything that's the state of California. Or I could send them to a certain layout. Or I could run a whole very complicated advanced set of things based on their login. So this is its most rudimentary form, but I highly suggest doing some type of thing like this and extrapolating out this concept into more complex things that can really provide a really interesting user experience. Security isn't just about protecting the data. Security is also about identifying who people are and possibly providing a more customized user experience.
Part star.
Yes.
Wow.
Way to go, Michael.
All right, well, thanks a ton, guys. Appreciate your attention and.